On behalf of Community Heart and Soul, I would like to welcome you to the second workshop in our Getting Started series. We will be discussing the 4 elements of readiness for Community Heart and Soul. My name is Alexis Halbert, and I'm a Senior Associate at Community Heart and Soul, and I am coming to you out of my home office in Denver, Colorado.
My name is Eric Estrada. I'm a Community Manager with the Community Foundation of South Jersey, coming out of my home office in Westville, New Jersey, Gloucester County.
Great, and we also have Community Heart and Soul staff. We've got Caitlin Davison in Maine, who is on our chat today, and we also have Joan Wagner in Vermont, who's hosting us on the Adobe Connect platform. Okay, so we have some people who were here last week and are interested in learning a little bit more about the tools, learning about how really to connect people during this time of COVID. Thank you so much for your comments in the chat. As I mentioned, we're using the Adobe Connect platform today, which will allow us to share visuals, to be interactive, and to take your questions. We will also have the chat box running throughout the webinar down in the right corner. And again, if you are having any technical difficulties, please email us directly at info@communityheartandsoul.org. You can also see on your screen there is files that it's on the right center. That is where you can download your Getting Started workbook if you have not done so already. And at the bottom right, there are also our important web links. That's the website link to the Community Heart and Soul website, our Facebook page. Please like us if you haven't already. We also have the link to the Transform New Jersey website, which Eric will be talking a little bit about. So I'm excited to be joined virtually today by Eric Estrada, Community Manager for the Community Foundation of South Jersey. Eric is training as a Community Heart and Soul coach and is leading the charge for the Transform South Jersey initiative. Eric is going to share stories about this work throughout our presentation today. Community Heart and Soul is embraced in different ways by residents, local nonprofits, town governments, statewide organizations, and foundations. In this partnership, our organization, Community Heart and Soul, is working to support the Community Foundation of South Jersey in its mission to build residents' capacity to strengthen the social, cultural, and economic vibrancy of their communities, and to inform future community development based on what matters most. Not every Heart and Soul town has a foundation affiliation like in New Jersey. As we will talk about in our review of the hopes and for the future exercise from our last webinar, there are a diverse number of reasons why towns and other partners commit to Heart and Soul. Overall, town and resident collaboration is an important part of success and can include many forms of investment. We will discuss these elements in today's webinar, the 4 elements of readiness, learning how to prepare for Community Heart and Soul by recognizing existing community strengths and opportunities, as well as in the webinar on October 27th, Community Investment in Heart and Soul, planning for the resource needs to carry out your Community Heart and Soul effort. One of the best parts of my work is the exceptional people who are involved and their dedication to the principles of Heart and Soul. It's my great pleasure to have Eric Estrada on the webinar with us today. Eric.
I was trying to sneak in a chat response that went away when the camera switched to me, but I will share my contact information for folks. Again, Alexis, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you today. As Alexis mentioned, I am a Community Heart and Soul coach in training, so we actually got a chance to meet in Vermont earlier this year in February, pre-COVID, back when things were relatively normal. So it's exciting to be able to connect with her again and everybody here. But I'm coming here today. I was asked to join today because in my role as a community manager with the Community Foundation of South Jersey, we are a community foundation, a foundation like many others that you may be familiar with or you may have interacted with in wherever it is that you're coming from today. And what we found as an opportunity with Community Heart and Soul was a chance to do things a little bit differently. Now, Transform South Jersey is an initiative we developed in partnership with a lot of other people. It's not just us. New Jersey Health Initiatives of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the PSE&G Foundation, the Wells Fargo Regional Community Development Corporation, Ocean First Foundation, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, as well as the folks at Community Heart and Soul, where we said we always come up with these initiatives. We're always trying to make positive change in the community. At the Community Foundation of South Jersey specifically, our mission is trying to harness the power of philanthropy to make positive change. But just like many other funders, we often find that we come up with some idea, well-intentioned, we think it's a great idea, and we ask folks to say, who would like some money to try this idea? And everybody wants to try it, and everybody thinks it's the greatest idea they ever heard of. And everybody wants to say how amazing this all is. Let's just go ahead, give us a grant, and we'll do exactly what you're asking. But I think all of the folks that have come together as part of this initiative recognize that that wasn't working for anybody. Folks really weren't happy with what we were seeing. The communities that we were working in were really stretching and trying to maybe make us feel better or make us feel like what we were doing was a good idea. And at the same time, we're trying to fit in what they already wanted to do into what we were presenting as a way to kind of secure funding. And it's not in any way to point the finger or say that folks were doing something wrong, but we knew there was something different in terms of how we approached this work that we saw when we were introduced to Community Heart and Soul. So I'd love to talk more about it, and I could share how that relationship was built and cultivated over time. But Joan, if you could go to the next slide, what I wanted to do was just say how we at the Community Foundation put together this broader initiative, Transform South Jersey, that used Community Heart and Soul as its foundation to work in communities, to build community leadership, so that we could accomplish other goals as well. So for Transform South Jersey, not only do we have 6 communities, you don't need to move to the slide now, but you'll see them in a second, 6 different communities in South Jersey that are going through their own individual heart and soul journeys. We also are bringing them together periodically because whether it be Willingboro in Burlington County, New Jersey, or Winslow Township in Camden County, New Jersey, or even Down Township in Cumberland County, New Jersey, we know there are things that are relevant or similar, whether they're opportunities, whether they're challenges, that having these 6 communities invest in themselves, build their community leadership, build their community capital, dollars, resources, networks, all those things. We knew there was a unique opportunity there. So we took Community Heart and Soul and said, let's let that be the foundation for these 6 communities. And while they strengthen their communities, we can also work with them as a group to try to address common issues. I do hear that I see that I'm getting maybe breaking up a little bit, so please let me know if that's still an issue. But the last piece that I'll mention around Transform South Jersey is just this. At the Community Foundation, what we do is we help folks establish community funds. We help folks establish endowed funds, whether that be at the family level, the community level, the business level, or whatever that might be. A piece that's unique to Transform South Jersey that may not happen in other communities that are working with Community Heart and Soul is the establishment of an endowed community fund in each of these communities. At the end of this process, all of the communities will have a chance to establish their own fund that will be locally controlled, that they'll get to determine where they make grants to out of a fund that they control, that they have local access and control over. And that's something that, for me, having worked in philanthropy for a while, has always excited me and what drew me to the position. But for the folks from New Jersey, or for the folks familiar with New Jersey, we did just want to quickly share, these are the 6 communities we're working in right now. They are just getting started in their heart and soul journey. We selected them after a year-long process that I'll talk more about later in terms of how we determined these communities were ready. And I would just encourage folks to, if you want to learn more, please check out our website, transformsouthjersey.org. to hear about what each of the communities are up to and how they're engaging in this process. So I'll pass it back to Alexis now.
Great, thank you, Eric. Yes, as we go through the various exercises, Eric will be coming back on to share his insights and stories on how South Jersey towns have engaged with the readiness work that we're going to be looking at today. So let's do a brief recap of last week's webinar for everyone who's new and as a review for folks who were able to join us on sort of the core information on Community Heart and Soul. So as you heard last week, Community Heart and Soul is purpose-built specifically for towns and small cities. The approach is not cookie cutter. Community Heart and Soul is designed with the unique character of each community and the people who live there in mind. The work is face-to-face. We start with connections. Community engagement in its many forms gets people out meeting one another. As a result, relationships are built, new leaders emerge, and volunteerism grows. Community Heart and Soul is data-driven. All of our community engagement, from story gathering to comments on sticky notes, generates data that is analyzed through our purpose-built system. That data provides a clear picture of what residents value most about their town. Heart and Soul is action-oriented. Community engagement that is effective, comprehensive, and fun, it has got to be fun, leads to trust within and across groups in your community. By learning what matters most to the people around you and acting on it, experiences and ideas can become the basis for short and long-term plans that the entire community can support and implement. So last week, Leanne and Jane introduced us to the 3 principles and the 4 phases of Heart and Soul. The principles of involving everyone, focusing on what matters most, and playing the long game, guide tactics and decision-making throughout Heart and Soul, while the 4 phases help direct your work for a successful process and outcomes. The Getting Started work, which is the focus of this webinar series, is what prepares and launches you and your town into Community Heart and Soul. We also heard many stories last week about the key outcomes for Heart and Soul towns, including the emergence of new leaders, trust being built, and history and culture being honored. Leanne told us the story of the towns of Carlisle and Mount Holly Springs and the uncovering of the AME Church and African American Civil War era graveyard. Through Heart and Soul and storytelling, students from around the state, volunteers from the community, and even town maintenance crews have rallied around the preservation of the church and the graveyard, which were along the path of the Underground Railroad. As Leanne shared, the church was a community asset hiding in plain sight, and it is now a great source of pride and a symbol of the community's appreciation for its heritage and history. The Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission declared it one of the 5 top endangered assets in the state, and it is being nominated for the National Register of Historic Places. Jane told us stories from Bucksport, Maine, and how the ideas for action that arose from public engagement on what mattered most. New volunteers and leaders took on the action items, which ranged from downtown beautification through the adoption of a barrel program and cleanup days with hundreds of volunteers, to new businesses coming to town, encouraged by the enthusiasm, pride, and newfound connections within the community. If you would like to hear more stories about Heart and Soul in small towns and cities across the country, we invite you to visit our website, communityheartandsoul.org. You can also see the growth of Community Heart and Soul across the United States in our map. Leanne and Jane also talked about how communities are adapting engagement during COVID-19 and using Heart and Soul to stay connected. Eric, would you please share some examples of what's been happening in the communities that you work with in New Jersey?
No, absolutely. We're excited to join the almost 100 other communities that are going through this process around the country. But I think 2 examples that I'll quickly share around Community Heart and Soul and how we've seen them impact our communities. I did mention before we started around COVID-19, the town of Hamilton, New Jersey in Atlantic County, which is just in between Philadelphia and Atlantic City. What we saw there was just a recognition from the community that in trying to mobilize their community to demonstrate that they were ready or willing to participate in this heart and soul journey, um, in the fall or winter of 2019, what they found was they were creating systems and building an infrastructure that allowed their community to respond to COVID-19. They didn't realize that was going to be the case when they started on the process, but once they did understand how the pandemic was going to affect their community and how they wanted to best respond and support their community as they dealt with it, they were excited to say, wait a minute, we've already started to do this work. We already know how to get the word out there, how to mobilize folks, and that's something they did right away. But I do just quickly also want to share that it wasn't unique to COVID. I think one of the things that we've experienced in South Jersey is that a disruption like COVID is a big deal. We've never seen anything like this before. But there are disruptions and priorities that are going to come up everywhere you do this work. If we're working with communities, as you said earlier, Alexis, it's not about a cookie cutter answer. And so at the same time, while we've seen communities respond and react to increasing protests and uprisings around the police murder of unarmed Black men and women, we've seen communities that we're working with say, hey, Heart and Soul Woodbury, New Jersey, and Gloucester County, we need your help. How do we make sure the community knows that we're listening? How do we make sure the community feels like they're heard? We, as the town council and the mayor, we're struggling with that. But we know that's the work you're doing as part of Heart and Soul. And how can we tap into that? So, in both cases, we've seen our communities, even just through getting ready for Heart and Soul, build skills and the ability to respond to things that nobody necessarily thought they would have to maybe 6 months ago even.
Thank you, Eric. Absolutely. The reasons why communities do Heart and Soul are diverse, and the thing that underlies all of it is that connection. Is what happens when people start talking to each other, hearing each other's stories, listening to one another. It is an untapped power that really is the foundation of the action and the vision for the future of a lot of small cities and towns. So in our webinar last week, we did the first exercise in the Getting Started guide, which is called Hopes for the Future. And this is a way to identify what really is top of mind for a community and why it is Heart and Soul might be good for them to work with. So from our webinar chat last week, I just wanted to bring forth a few things that people shared. So Will Grimes shared that he's interested in a vibrant downtown with no vacancies. Becky talked about good conversations for working across differences in her community. Laura discussed helping downtown to be more social and interconnected. Hillary talked about representation of community members in decision-making. And Toyela Rogers-Chan discussed her hope for the future, which was youth engagement in leadership. Okay, so now that we're caught up from last week, we can dig into our topic for today, which is the 4 elements of readiness. So let's start by looking at the milestones for the getting ready phase. In addition to being on the slide here, you can find the milestones on page 6 at the bottom of your Getting Started with Community Heart and Soul workbook. Again, if you haven't downloaded that already, you can do so in Adobe Connect. This workbook contains all of the exercises that we're covering in the workshop series, and they will prepare you to host these conversations in your own community. Today's workshop focuses on defining community strengths, assets, and opportunities. So how does a community decide that they're ready to do Heart and Soul? How do you know if a person or a community is ready for anything new or different? What are some of the indicators that you can think of? It might be from your own personal experience or in your own community. Joan is going to open up a chat for us here. Or we can do it, okay, we can do it, I'm sorry, right down there in the participant chat if you want to add your ideas. How do you know when a person or community is ready for something new? Right, Tom says sometimes it takes a crisis. Absolutely. Eric, you had shared a little bit earlier about Heart and Soul being a shift in your grant making. How did you know that you all were ready for something new?
Like I said earlier, I think, what we found was we were kind of tired of getting the same old results, or similar results in the work that we were doing. So for us, we started to see the same things happening over and over again, the same people showing up over and over again. And that is in no way a knock on the amazing people who who have committed their lives and put in way more than their fair share to keep things progressing and moving in a positive direction. But we just knew, after a while, like I said, I myself have had the chance to work with a number of different foundations for a little over a decade now. And you start to see those patterns, and you start to see, and you know that you're looking for something different. So for us, it was just kind of those patterns arising and saying, there's got to be another way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's echoed in the chat here, which is, when you try the same thing over and over again and it's not yielding the result that you want. Or when there are new ideas, new situations, new people in your community who you'd like to be involved, you'd like to hear from. Let's see, what else do we have here in the chat? Yeah, even changes in, when you see traditional economic development measures that may not have had the outcome that you've wanted. When I had the pleasure of working on Heart and Soul in my hometown in Colorado, Paonia in the North Fork Valley. We had 3 coal mines in the community that we could see that economic changes were going to really have an effect on our local economy. And the 3 local chambers started hosting valley-wide meetings with business owners and residents to determine what our assets were. We really needed to understand where we were at so that we could know where we needed to go in the future. And we really started talking about what the future could look like 10 years out. And it was really clear that people were ready to work together. When the desire to change outweighs the residents' current level of comfort with the state and their community. Yes, these are all great answers. Thank you so much. So when you know that you're ready for something new, how do you then start preparing for something new? Community readiness is a term we use to talk about the baseline knowledge, skills, and attitudes of a community that might help or hinder the success of community heart and soul. So if we were about to go on a journey, maybe it's a road trip or a hike, what would we need in order to be prepared? So in the case of a hike, we may know where it is that we want to get to. As you can see, the man on the right hand picture pointing to the horizon. But having a map to get there is going to be essential. We need the right equipment, we need the right supplies to sustain us, companions to join us, and we need the confidence that we're ready for the journey ahead. Examining the elements of community readiness help prepare you for the community heart and soul journey. They include community interest, leadership, relationships and community culture, and resources. And we're going to take a look at these each one by one. So for community interest, are residents and leaders interested and willing to commit to community heart and soul? Community leadership. Do formal and informal leaders in the community make decisions based on what matters most to residents? And is there an interest in sharing leadership and ensuring opportunities for new leaders to come forward? Which organizations or individuals in town are seen to demonstrate strong leadership? What are the strengths of your municipal leaders, including elected and appointed officials? Who are the informal leaders in town that influence attitudes and opinions? For relationships and community culture, do residents from different backgrounds engage with each other? Do they trust one another? Do community organizations communicate and collaborate to address local needs and issues? What are some of the ways that community groups do collaborate and work together on shared interests? What does it look like when there's positive public engagement in your community? Where are there noticeable divides or distrust between groups in the community? How would you describe residents' attitudes towards the community? And how do you come together to celebrate? And finally, with resources, are there financial and human resources available to implement community heart and soul? What resources are available to support the first steps? This might be financial or human capital, such as staff and volunteers, in-kind support, meeting space, or food donations. Next slide, please. Oh, we're staying on this one, sorry. As we move through today's discussion, it's important to remember that every community is unique when it comes to readiness. There's not one perfect version, but it is key to know your community's strengths so that you can maximize them, and also to know the opportunities in your community for improvement so that you can strengthen them. As you're thinking about where your community sits in terms of getting started with community heart and soul. So I am going to turn it back to Eric so he can tell us a little bit about the readiness work in New Jersey.
Yeah. So thank you, Alexis. I think for Transform South Jersey, as I mentioned, some of the partners that are involved or that are involved earlier, and the community foundation itself. Like I said, a number of us had been working in the area for quite some time. We had been working with our nonprofit partners. We had been working in communities. And that's not to say that we were doing everything right. But I say that to say that we had experience. We knew a lot of the people that we were working with, or we knew a lot of the work that they had set out to do and the great things that they've accomplished to date. So when we were looking at readiness, when we were looking at how could we determine which communities we would be able to work with for Transform South Jersey, because we were limited to the amount of grant funding that we were able to raise for this initiative, we were only able to pick 6. In South Jersey, there are over 200 communities that are, there are over 206 communities in South Jersey. Because the Heart and Soul model is geared towards working in small cities and towns, we had a cap of about 50,000 residents in terms of which communities we'd work with. And even then, we're talking about over 190 communities. So when we wanted to figure out how we can possibly pick a cohort that made the most sense and what that looks like, we had to give it a lot of thought, and we had to do some trial and error and work with a lot of folks to figure that out. But ultimately, what we decided to do was, if you go to communityheartandsoul.org at the Community Heart and Soul website, you can find various resources about if you're interested in this, starting a heart and soul journey. And one of the resources they have available is the Getting Ready for Heart and Soul Introductory Workbook Guide. In that workbook guide, there are a series of activities. We're going to talk a little bit about them today. But what we asked our communities to do was we set up this multi-stage process. So first, we just asked people to nominate their town for consideration. And at that point, then we said, okay, you nominated your town. This is why you're excited. This is why you're interested about it. But now we're going to ask you to do some work. We're going to ask you to demonstrate your readiness or your commitment to going through this process and being a part of this multi-year initiative called Transform South Jersey, going through this 2-year heart and soul process of mobilizing and organizing your town. So we asked them to complete some of the activities, to get people together, to talk about these readiness factors that Alexis just mentioned. What is the interest? What is the community leadership? What resources are around? And we asked the folks to start talking about their understanding of who is in their community. And all of that was part of their application. So we recognized that it was a heavy lift. It wasn't easy. We did provide small momentum building grants to help them, and this was because of our funding partners allowed us to do that, where we were able to give small grants that let them hold community meetings to find out this information. But it also allowed us to then say, okay, it's not about picking the 6 best communities. It's not about picking the 6 communities that scored the highest. And this was something that required a lot of back and forth between the funding partners, between the folks at Community Heart and Soul, and our board at the Community Foundation of South Jersey, because we really wanted to say, what is the best cohort? If we're going to pick 6 communities, how do we best reflect the diversity that exists in South Jersey, where there are rural and urban towns, where there are large and small cities, where there, for folks that might not be from New Jersey, this was something that was even news to me, or took some time for me to figure out. But you have the Delaware River on the west side of the state, and then the Jersey Shore on the right side of the state. So both sides of the state are surrounded by water, but those are very different cultures and communities. So much so that folks don't understand how big a part of kind of this shore culture fits into folks' lives, even if they don't live in New Jersey, even if they live nearby, where that's a part of their, what the summer means to them. But one of the challenges I think we ran in putting this application process that asked folks to share what they were learning was this desire for the communities to put their best foot forward. And that's understandable. We get that. But one of the things we really had to push folks to do was to be vulnerable, to be transparent, and to talk about the challenges that they were facing as they were starting to do this work. We were very adamant that we were looking folks who were trying to start. So you shouldn't be finished. You shouldn't go through these activities and everything is perfect. What I told folks time and time again was, if everything's perfect, then you don't need our support. You don't need our help. But that's not to say we're just looking for folks that are struggling, folks that are hurting, or communities that have challenges. We really wanted to say, you tell us your understanding of your community. You tell us what you're interested in, what ideas you're wrestling with, and what could moving forward look like. To us, that's how we picked the best cohort, the best communities. It wasn't just simply the 5 or 6 communities that scored the highest on any type of proposal. And I think that was different. That was different for us as funders. That was different for the communities that were applying. That's not the normal grant process. And I think that's something that folks who get engaged with Heart and Soul will see time and time again. This isn't your typical grant project. But I will say, as I'm just to close out around this, as we asked the communities to talk about what they were understanding, was they had to do this to apply for Transform South Jersey. But even if this wasn't a part of Transform South Jersey, they had the opportunity to take what they were learning and do stuff with it. So we had a community. We had some great communities who applied, but we weren't able to support and make a part of this cohort. But one in Camden County specifically, Runnymede, New Jersey, they came back time and time again and said, wow, by us getting organized around this, we've seen what we can do when we put our mind to it, when we try to kind of bring more people to the table. And we see how we could take this to benefit us in different ways separate from this initiative. So it really did hurt me that we weren't able to support them as part of this initiative, that they're not a part of our cohort, but they were able to take the work that they did and the readiness that they demonstrated to advance other projects and secure funding from other funders for things unrelated to Heart and Soul. If we do have a second cohort of Heart and Soul communities in South Jersey, we'd love to bring them back into the loop. But I do just want to share how these getting ready activities will not only benefit you for Heart and Soul, but just really any of the work you're trying to do to make a positive change in your community.
Thank you, Eric, for both, getting real with the communities on the ground as they talk about what's really happening for them, and also making this readiness work real for us, so we can understand what it really looks like on the ground. So just to repeat what I shared, that in general, community readiness is a term that we use to talk about the baseline knowledge and skills and attitudes of a community that might help or hinder the success of community Heart and Soul. And so, as you can see in the slide, we've got the cover of the workbook and the Readiness Inventory. So readiness is one of 4 different exercises that are part of this Heart and Soul Getting Started workbook, excuse me. So the first is the Hopes for the Future exercise that we went through last week. The second is the Readiness Inventory to look at sort of, as I said, these baseline knowledge, skills, and attitudes that might help or hinder your success. The third, which will be discussed next week, is who lives and works and plays in your community. So this is the beginning of the community network analysis exercise that underpins Heart and Soul. The following week, we'll talk about spreading the word. How do you really talk about Heart and Soul and community development? And the final one will be the opportunity to really dig more deeply into the resources that are needed to do this work. Okay, so we're going to kind of mock or model the community readiness exercise. Again, this will be different depending on whether you are in person with folks or you're doing what we're doing, which is online. So the 4 elements of readiness are listed on the left of the inventory, and on the right we have the boxes where you can assess whether that element is a strength, an opportunity, is mixed, or if you are unsure. So let's define those categories. So if something is a strength, the condition is present and will contribute to the success of Heart and Soul. If it's an opportunity, we want to improve or bring about this condition. If it's mixed, there are both strengths and opportunities present. And if you're unsure, we need to do more homework and outreach to understand what the status of this element is in our community. Okay, so we've selected 3 different statements from the inventory for you to consider today. Take a look at each one of these statements and determine how would you evaluate this statement in terms of the conditions that are present in your town. Is this statement a strength or an opportunity? Is it both? Is it mixed? Or are you unsure and need to do more homework? So we have the 3 here. Number 6, my community has strong leadership or an interest in strengthening its leadership. The middle statement is policies and decisions made in my community are guided by what matters most to those who live, work, and play here. And the inventory statement on the right, number 11, my community has interest in improving communications, collaboration, and cooperation between organizations. So again, thinking about your town or community, how would you respond to each of these elements of readiness in your town? Okay, Joan, would you broadcast the results for us? Okay, so with inventory statement number 6, my community has strong leadership or interest in strengthening its leadership. We have, let's see, it's a little bit of a tie, or the one that got the most votes was that it's an opportunity. So you see this work as an opportunity to be able to do that within your community. Looks like for some of you it's already a strength. It's mixed. We have some maybe you have a strong formal leadership, but maybe your informal leadership in town is not as strong, that those are volunteers or people within the nonprofit sector. Great, and even some folks who want to take some more time to figure that out. Okay, for our middle question, policies and decisions made in my community are guided by what matters most to those who live, work, and play. Our majority answer is mixed. So sometimes yes, sometimes no. And many of you also see that as an opportunity, which is great. That is, again, a core component of Heart and Soul. And for our third inventory statement, my community has interest in improving communications, collaboration, and cooperation between organizations. This is, by far, you all see this as an opportunity. Fantastic. So here in our workshop, we're answering this question based on your own town, so it makes sense that we're seeing different responses. But when you gather a group of people together in your town to talk, you may actually find the same thing happens, or you may find that there's more of a consensus. But that's really the core of this exercise, is it's really meant to be used as a conversation guide with various community groups, rather than a definitive assessment that's completed by one person or a group of people. The inventory prompts communities to talk about their current conditions, and it offers people the opportunity to give their individual perspectives about what they personally see and experience in their community. It uncovers that there might be different perspectives to take into an account and to address. For example, one person's experience with local leadership might be very positive, while another person may feel that leadership is not welcoming or responsive. Overall, community members can use their individual responses to the inventory statements to determine is the condition a motivation itself for doing heart and soul? Will the condition be a benefit to get things moving in a positive direction? Or is the condition something that really needs to be addressed as part of your getting started work in order for your program to be successful? The inventory might also reveal that more information is needed before anyone can accurately evaluate whether a particular condition is a strength or an opportunity. Okay, so when you're doing this exercise, there is a second part after people have gone through and done the inventory, and let's try that now. So we're going to take a poll of the 3 statements that you just thought about for your own town. Which do you think would most impact your heart and soul effort? Which statement would most impact the heart and soul effort in your community? Again, we have number 6 at the top. My community has strong leadership or an interest in strengthening leadership. Number 8, policies and decisions made in my community are guided by what matters most to those who live, work, and play here. And number 11, my community has interest in improving communication, collaboration, and cooperation between organizations. Okay, any last votes? Joan, broadcasting the results, thank you. So it looks like number 8 and number 11 were close, but we're going to go with number 11 for our exercise today. That was 45% of you chose this one. My community has an interest in improving communication, collaboration, and cooperation between organizations. Okay, so imagine that you are in a discussion with your community, as I described previously. We're going to take a minute to just kind of have a little bit of an online discussion. Again, you could be doing this in person with a small group, of course with social distancing. You could be doing this over Zoom. There's lots of different ways that this exercise can unfold. So on the chat box on the left, what examples from your community influence the selection of this statement? How does this condition currently affect activities, initiatives, and programs in your community? And in the chat box on the right, if you could add, how might your heart and soul effort benefit from this condition? Or what might you need to address in your town if you decided to move forward with heart and soul? So again, imagine you're in a discussion. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just repeating the directions, just so folks know that on the left, you're talking about examples that influence your selection of the statement, and on the right, how it is your community might benefit from this condition.
Now, I was just going to add that when we asked the South Jersey communities to complete some of these readiness activities, what they ended up doing was primarily hold community events where they asked folks to fill out the surveys individually by themselves, and then they held a community discussion to answer some of these questions, to really talk about why it is that they chose what they chose and how even prioritizing these areas might benefit their work moving forward. Folks got really creative. You know, yes, now primarily this would probably be done using Zoom or some virtual tool. But one of the communities that we worked in, because they are a little bit in the middle of nowhere, they organized these weekly tailgating parties to go see the Philadelphia Eagles play football on Sundays. And they actually would rent a bus for the community to go to the game. And they did that at one of those community tailgates. They asked folks to talk, and they asked folks, and you know, this is a small community of probably even 1,000 people, and they were able to get over 100 people to show up and participate in this discussion. You know, maybe they felt a little tricked. They thought they were coming to watch football, But it was exciting to see how they were able to just kind of take this and run with it in a way that got folks really excited. But to your point earlier, I'd just add that I think it's only, the survey only tells you kind of folks' individual opinions. It was the conversation after the fact that really got folks to understand the nuance and why maybe some people felt differently than others. And again, that's what we were looking for. We were looking for disagreement and discussion in terms of maybe everybody doesn't see this the same way.
Absolutely. And that's a benefit. And it's also a benefit to doing it with multiple groups. People have the opportunity to really look more deeply into what's working in their community and what they want to work better. And in a certain sense, doing this inventory is also a way to really deepen people's understanding of the benefits of community heart and soul and what going through the process and the method can really deliver to a community.
Yeah.
So great. We've got lots of great examples that on the left of why, what influenced their selection of this statement. It seems like a lot of people do have organizations that are working together on similar issues, but maybe don't have as much of the crossover as they'd like to see. Organizations that are pulling from the same pool of volunteers, that there's maybe some communication gaps that are currently happening in their town.
Just one more thing I'd add is that I mentioned that we were asking folks to do this as part of their application process. But once we selected the communities and they actually officially formally started their heart and soul process, we actually asked them to return to this. And I think that's something that folks will see happens a lot with heart and soul, is that you don't just do something and it's done and then you move on. We asked the folks to revisit their understanding of their community's readiness once they got started, to say, do the group of folks here today still agree that this is kind of how folks are thinking? Or how do folks that are here today think about it? Because we expect that that's going to change over time and should change over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with both formal and informal practices, how do you plant the seeds for those positive actions to continue? So, we've got an example where several organizations in the community already do things like memorandum of understanding around how it is they're going to work together. And then in the chat on the right, it seems like there are a lot of comments about how organizations or communities can actually have more formal processes where town governments or organizations are collaborating with each other. How is there more intention around that journey towards collaboration? Great. Thank you so much for all of your answers in the chat. You can see, hopefully, that there is a lot of potential discussion points that you can have within your own community with using the community inventory. Okay, Joan, could you go back to the PowerPoint? Thank you. Okay, to wrap up the exercise, you can follow up with discussion questions, additional ones in your community, or kind of pinpoint what it is the next steps are that you might need to take based on the discussion. So for example, if we were to look again at community interest, what community groups or leaders would benefit from learning more about heart and soul if you're taking a look at community interest? For community leadership, what opportunities are there to cultivate new leaders as heart and soul begins? What are the best ways to leverage our strengths in leadership for heart and soul? How could community leadership change for the better as a result of heart and soul? With relationships and community culture, how might heart and soul improve the civic life in the town? And with resources, what resources are needed to ensure heart and soul is successful? And Eric, you've shared a lot about how the Readiness Inventory really helped your communities. Is there any final comments to add?
None that I think that I haven't already said, other than what I just echoing what I mentioned about Runnymede and some of the other communities, that this process of organizing the community to respond to this RFP, which is unique. It's not how Heart and Soul always happens. It's not how even we do the work that we do always. Um, we were so excited that the communities themselves saw this as beneficial, even if they weren't getting a grant necessarily.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, well, we are getting close to the end of the hour. We want to open it up for questions. So based on what we've done together today, what questions are top of mind for you? You can see, in addition to the chat on the left, we also have a question and answer pod. You're welcome to put your questions and answers in there. Looks like we covered everything, Eric. There's no questions.
Awesome.
Okay, Kate C. What if the local officials are not supportive and refuse to communicate with local groups? I would say that continuing to invite local officials is a really great way to get involvement. There can be multiple ways that you show up at town events in order to help get the discussion around community heart and soul on the agenda. That can include communicating with different people doing some of the readiness work. You know, it's always great in a small town. I would say that one of the most powerful communication channels is word of mouth. So if local officials are hearing about some of your efforts to get these conversations started, and they start hearing it from a bunch of different people, that could be a positive way.
So I know one of the questions that came in directed towards me was just why we, as the Community Foundation of South Jersey, chose Community Heart and Soul versus other community organizing models or practices. Um, you know, one thing that I'll be very transparent in saying is that I think what we found was that each of our funding partners were motivated by different things, and for whatever reason, um, there was something about Heart and Soul that really resonated with all of them in ways um, other models had not before. So some of the partners we worked with had been doing a lot of community organizing activities, again, for decades and for a long time in New Jersey and around the country. And there was something that was seen as unique here. And again, I think everybody may say something a little different, but from my perspective, and what I think folks really gravitated towards, was this notion that what drove Heart and Soul's work was what mattered most to residents, specifically. Now there are other, you know, bottom up grassroots organizing models, but I think what also was unique, this wasn't an outsider coming in to try to determine what that was for the community. The Heart and Soul model really, by design, gets the community to do the work, gets the volunteers in the community to lead the work, carry it out, and to own it, which I think is a lot different than a lot of the other planning activities we've seen or been a part of in the past. So it not just in by, you know, in wording and language to say it's bottom up and it's resident driven, but that we saw from the very steps that need to be taken and the work that needs to be done, it's done by the community, not on the community.
There's also a few questions around what you can do if your town is not even ready to start readiness work or discussions. I mean, that's going to really vary depending on what the conditions are in your community. I think you'll find that the exercises we present in the readiness guide can really provide a starting point. So for example, even the hopes for the future exercise that we did last week, if you can just get folks starting to talk about what it is that matters to them, what their hopes for the future. I also know that this can also be a place where getting youth involved, if they have a feeling that they want to be heard or have not been heard, elevating voices that are important to the community. Also using the arts, right? Maybe there is some kind of a campaign in the community, whether it's writing on, sidewalks with sidewalk chalk, helping to get people's ideas moving about the fact that they can influence and do have the power to shape the future of their community. Those are some great questions.
Yeah. And I really do encourage folks to check out the Getting Ready for Heart and Soul workbook guide that's available at Community Heart and Soul. I mean, I feel like they lay out even a few activities, just conversations you could start to have with people to see if there's enough momentum to formally do the activities. I mean, but even just the conversations are helpful. One thing I want to share, because I saw the question about the most surprising thing I heard from a local official. As I mentioned, we went through an almost year-long process to identify the towns, work with the towns. We visited the towns. There were multiple stages throughout it. And at the very end, where we almost had one particular community set to go, they did everything they needed to do. They blew us away in many ways. At the meeting, the mayor said, look, sell me on this. Like, why should we take your grant for $100,000 to do this work? He did not think that it was, he wanted to be convinced. And, it caught me off guard because I was kind of like, wait, you want me to convince you why you should take a grant for $100,000 to do this work? But I absolutely appreciated his honesty and his willingness to not just buy into something because someone was coming in from out of town to say, this is some good idea that you're trying to do. We had great conversations after the fact where he said, look, if my community wants to do something positive, we're going to do everything that we can to support them. But we're not trying to chase money. We're not trying to chase, these quick fixes. So we are going to be a little skeptical. And that's a group that, honestly, I'm excited that they're a part of our cohort. I'm excited that we're working with. But I will say, as a funder, I think I was caught off guard by how skeptical this community was to even, receive the support that they went through the process and applied for. We've had some bold folks as a part of this this journey.
And thank you for sharing that, Eric, because one-on-one conversations are also a really great way to get started. Just getting a pulse, a feel for how things are going, what people are feeling, how they might want to be engaged. And one thing to think about, Heart and Soul it's not here to be a panacea or a cure-all for community issues or problems or conflict. So if you're looking at that readiness inventory and there are some pretty strong challenges or issues that you need to look at, those should be addressed before you start engaging in a larger project like Community Heart and Soul. And there's a question about the timeline. So Heart and Soul takes approximately 18 months to 2 years to go through all 4 phases. That does not include the getting started work. Again, this is going to be something that is important to your community in terms of the timeline. It may take you 6 months. It may take you 3 months. You may be ready. You may really, all of those different pieces are in place. You know your opportunities and strengths. You know the places you need to lead into, and you have those elements ready and in place. So it really depends on your community. Okay, so please remember that you can ask additional questions or contact us for more information at info@communityheartandsoul.org. Please feel free to continue the conversation via email. And we really want to thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you can make it to our next 3 webinars. On October 13th, we have Who Lives, Works, and Plays in Our Community. October 20th, Spreading the Word about Heart and Soul in our community. October 27th, Community Investment in Heart and Soul. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Eric, for your time. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Take care, everyone.